All right. Greetings, explorers. Hope everybody can hear me. Um, I have asked JT from JT Follows JC to join me for another conversation. I had him on a couple months ago. Really enjoyed his insights, and I wanted to I wanted him to shed a little bit of light on the little season, the millennial reign in the little season. He's very well versed with his scripture and biblical knowledge, so I think it'll help bring. I've had a lot of comments asking about that, asking me to elaborate on that and dig into it deeper. So I think this is my way of cheating in my research, is just by bringing on JT. So here he is. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me on, Chris. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're on all platforms almost. It looks like too. Your link tree I see here on your YouTube. So
Yeah, when when you get banned on one, or you get threatened to be banned on the other one, so you're like, I probably should diversify my content. And yeah, so I mean, it's kind of like, especially when I first started doing this stuff, I started just making reels. So it's like if you can make a reel, like it takes hardly any other effort to just post it to multiple platforms, and then I feel like that hopefully I found a home on YouTube, because I think I want to make longer form stuff. So,
yeah,
but at the same time, again, as somebody trying to think a step ahead, I'm also on Rumble because like
mhm.
either you could see the writing on the wall, or like there's times where we talk about things that we know we can't talk about, and we say, hey, let's go. It's
Over
over on the
Rumble.
other, over on the other place.
Yeah, the backup platform. I have the same thing, and it's the YouTube censorship that we worry about. So it's good to have that long form backup, I guess. Right.
Yeah, and what's interesting to say that is that I started talking about things that, like, there's certain hot button topics. Obviously, I think most people who make content, we know we've almost learned to self censor in certain ways. But I made a video about the mud flood on Instagram, I posted it on Instagram and on Facebook, and I got a fact check on that, and they said it was false information.
Mm.
There's no evidence for the mud flood, and I was like, well, my video was 5 minutes long, and it was about 5 minutes worth
Of evidence.
of evidence. I mean, like, I kind
I
of
like that.
disagree, but what are you gonna do?
Yeah, yeah, you gotta love that. They're really trying to steer us into a box with what we look at and what we're even tempted to look at. It's
Yeah,
pretty
for
funny.
sure.
But well, let's get right down to it, if you don't mind. I'm already seeing some comments in the chat here about. So let me just preface this a little bit. So I've been researching the old world for a couple of years now, and that timeline, that 1800s timeline, where the bulk of all of this deception seems to be going on, um, sort of fits in with what people are now calling the little season. So it's interesting because for the longest time, and my impression's been, we're about to hit the apocalypse as far as biblical perspective is concerned, and Jesus is going to come back and do his thing. But what the old world research seems to have done is pulled some people away from that and more into the millennial. Jesus already came back. The millennial reign already happened, and then we are now in Satan's little season. So I don't know, how did I do with that? It might have been a bit of a
No, I
mess.
mean, that's pretty good summary, because I would say that as I first started making content, I made it. Like a lot of people, I was saying, like, this seems like the end times.
Hmm.
Like a lot of people, you're saying after 2020, we we saw this civilization what many of us thought were very stable, and you're like, man, things just changed so rapidly. And then anybody with kind of a Christian worldview background, you'd say, or maybe not even Christian. Like, obviously, I believe that different faiths have obviously apocalypse in their eschatology. So you'd say, whoa, things have changed. And if you have any kind of belief in something, you could say the signs could be here that some of this stuff's about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But as you continue to research, and I think that, praise God, I'd like to say that I'm open to being wrong. So
Mm-hmm.
I was sure about things, and then one day I was like, wait a minute, I'm not sure anymore. And I have to, you really have to decide what's true and what you believe. And I believe that has led me to the possibility that no, that this there's actually a lot of good evidence that the the apocalypse already happened.
Mm-hmm.
That
Mm-hmm.
there's evidence all over the world that something happened. And I think that for a lot of people, I know who listen to you, the mud flood, like that was some kind of cataclysm. I don't know. We don't know exactly how to explain it, but something happened in the recent past. And so, what do you do with that if you're believing that all these things in the Book of Revelation are coming in the future?
Hmm.
Because that's a weird thing to be left out of the story. If something on that kind of level, that's a worldwide phenomenon, happen, what do you do with that? And so, I think as a lot of people who are Christians like myself, when you're presented with the concept of Tataria and the old world and this other kind of civilization, like what do you do with that?
Hmm. Hmm.
Well, the only thing that really honestly makes sense is that maybe this is evidence of this grand time. The Bible talks about 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. That to me obviously resonated with me. There's things that I needed more convincing about, but it was like, dang, that actually put some pieces of the puzzle together in a way that is somewhat satisfying. But then I said again, I'm like continuing to research.
What's crazy to me is how well it fits, even for people who don't have any really knowledge of that chronology, biblically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems to fit really, really well with what we're seeing. Like we're post-apocalyptic, um, post-cataclysm world. I talk about that a lot on my channel. There's so much evidence for, like, you get into the melted buildings and
Mm-hmm.
geology and all the rest of it, and it's like clearly something intense happened here, and we're living in the aftermath of that, and the remnants of what was left. And then you're getting into this whole, well, somebody nefarious, malevolent, some entity or entities came in here and have basically enslaved us. Like, that's pretty obvious for anyone who's looking now, for
Yeah.
quite the time, right? So it fits really well with that. Satan is released, um, for the little season, right?
Well, right. So it's funny. I remember on the last time we talked, I remember saying that even if you have no biblical belief or understanding, you would say that the people who likely like your channel, they believe in a cover up of something.
Hmm.
And then to the level of people saying like places were burned down on purpose, buildings were destroyed on purpose, people were put in insane asylums on purpose when they were obviously shouldn't have gone. Kids used as slave labor, shipped around the world on trains and everything.
Oh
And
man.
so you're obviously talking about a certain level of evil that is hard to even grasp, and also the cover up of something that was better than what we're dealing with now. And then
Yeah.
we're lied to about that this is the best it's ever been. I
Hmm.
think most people can tell, even like in their own lifetimes, you're like, things don't really seem like they're getting better. I mean, obviously you could point to certain technologies and say, oh, things are improving in that way. But I mean, that's not how we measure how the quality of life. If
Yeah, it's
anything, we're
interesting when we say better. What's better and what's improved and what's not. It's interesting what we would say our iPhones and our computers are symbolic of progress, but our architecture certainly isn't. Unless you want to talk about certain aspects of our architecture that wasn't done. As far as the 100-story buildings and things like that. But visually and um, holistically, we've certainly, the architecture is nowhere near what it once was. What we're looking at, even in these photos, you know,
yeah.
something's we've lost something. We've lost something that, and you can tell just by looking at a lot of the architecture that that was a much more holistic way of being that brought these things into about.
Yeah, the real question is how was it done? I don't know if we'll ever really get into like understand that,
Hmm.
but you could just tell that there was a care of the way it looked and the design that like we can't really wrap our minds around because again I have a construction background and obviously they build things like very practically the cheapest way possible. And
Hmm.
I get it. I mean, it's like that's how people when they look to buy a house is. They try to get the most they can for the things they need it to be.
Yeah.
And that's what they do with everything. But there was a time obviously when they didn't do that. When they had I believe that again these things had beautiful forms, but I also think they must have had some kind of functions because that is the elaborate designs. Again, like you got to think about like try to put your own mind in somebody else's a couple hundred years ago. Like we still have the same kind of thought process. Like we wouldn't just be wasteful in that kind of way to make it just well over designed
Hmm.
without some kind of reason behind that. Because you got some people would say, you think we put too many arches in this building? Like it's like,
Yeah.
no, I'll put a couple more in there. Like, because there's a reason for them other than an aesthetic thing, even
Yes.
though they both are aesthetically pleasing. And I believe they must have had a very practical function too.
And what gets me is the cover up. Like this is not something that our history celebrates in any way. It's not something that really gets covered. If the architecture gets covered in our schooling system, it's more in a Greek and Roman. 2,000 years ago, this was how they built. We tried to copy them a little bit in the last 150 years, and that's basically what we're given as an explanation for this type of architecture. And so there's no sufficient explanation in my eyes to explain what we're seeing with all these examples.
Right. That's funny that you say that too, because I've thought about, and the more I've researched history, the more I've learned that it's real gray, and there's just like shadows of things that happen, and people's best guesses on what happened and when it happened over the course of like the Dark Ages and things like that, and even before the Dark Ages of like when they think things happen.
Hmm.
So the interesting thing would be like if you believe the Romans, based on what we're taught, is like they've kind of created I don't know, the foundation of democracy as we know it
Hmm.
in the modern world. Except that there was this time where like the Romans were forgotten almost like the people during the Dark Ages forgot how to do all the things the Romans did. And it was like, it wasn't until the Age of Enlightenment or whatever, they started bringing back all the Roman architecture, which again it seems like a lie. Like, because
Well,
why?
yeah, it doesn't make sense. All of a sudden, you pick yourself up and started building that way again after 1,000+ years, because there was a couple clever individuals that, I mean, it's a thin backstory. That's a large part I have with the problem as well. It's also shrouded in um, a lot of deception as when you get into the organized religion part of it, and the rewriting of history and the control of the people themselves as far as literacy goes, and even uh, reproductive, even the fact that how they had a stranglehold on the family itself. Like I'm just thinking right now of well, you talked about the orphans earlier, the odd fellows and the orphan trains, and how it was shameful to have a child out of wedlock. So where would you put that child? You would put that child into the hands of the people in control at the time, which would have been the churches and all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. I hope I'm not veering too far off here. It's sort of a topic I had in my mind for a while now, but you could see how they were able to control what we were going to learn through that process, because they would actually physically take these children into their possession and reteach them the world that they wanted us to know. So you can see that progress happening down through time.
Yeah, 100%. I think that it's funny when you think about it like that, that they physically took children and they put them on trains and then they shipped them around, and then they taught them a history or not history, everything in the way they wanted them to learn. But in the same way that the public school systems in America and likely Canada too, that we have put them on not orphan trains but on school buses, and they're
Hmm.
still doing that with the parents' blessings, because
Yeah,
we've been taught wrong, and then we continue the process through our kids.
we're the product of that, right? And for us, it's we've come down through time to a point where it's normal. Where that conditioning has happened enough generations deep that this is just the world that, and people like you and I who question what's normal, like we sometimes will talk about flat earth or old world or any of this kind of stuff, that is so far out in left field for most people that they don't even consider it as a possibility, and that's a result of that indoctrination that's happened down and is happening currently.
Oh, 100%. Well, I mean, like I said, I would say praise God though that maybe we've got to the point where we're like, no, I don't know that this is the right way to, it's like, because I think maybe because we are seeing like the slippery slope now, and we really are seeing like at some point you could probably say after World War I and everything, or World War II, and then things look like they're improving for a lot of people. And you think about like, especially in the United States, it was very prosperous times for like the baby boomers.
Mm-hmm.
So they were doing well. So it's kind of like they would not as much reason to question the things that are going on. Now you see like the people like myself, how we've seen the dips, and you're like, dang, this is not seems, you know, you can imagine even people younger than me, like when they just grew up with just like financial collapse and just all the things, and we realized all the debt and all the, yeah. So yeah, you have all the things that you're just looking in your life and you're like, how am I ever going to get ahead in this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, the boomers could at least probably say, we're storing away up retirement. I don't even want to know. Just, it's fine. I'm going to take care of what I've got going on, and I want to be taken care of when I'm older. But we are looking at it like, don't tell me this is the best it's ever been. It's not. And so then we look back and we say, if you're lying to me about this, maybe you're lying to me about things for before. And
yeah, I think it's important for guys like you and I think we're about the same age. Are you about 45?
Just turned 46 yesterday.
All right. Actually, I turned 46 last week.
Okay, there you go. Nice.
Anyway, I think it's important for guys in our age group who we could take the boomer route that you just mentioned. Say, I can just close my eyes, look away, and I'll just gather up all my eggs, and I'll get a property here, and I'll do this, and maybe I'll make it through. But I think it's important for people in our age group who have that option to say, no, we see the injustice, we see the problems, and we're siding with the younger generation who says there's nothing for us, and we realize that there's a big deception here. So I think there's a bit of a responsibility there as well to speak out against what we're seeing, and to speak the truth instead of squirreling away like the boomers, but like many boomers. I shouldn't say all of them because they're there's
some good ones. Even the boomers are okay sometimes. But let's talk about the little season, because I think that this a lot of people can point to the cover up, they can point to all the questions, but like this is a possible answer. And I find this one, especially as a Christian guy, obviously I'll admit it, I'm biased in this way. This checks a lot of boxes to make sense to me. And so what we're talking about in the little season, I'll just read from the scriptures here, because this is not a long chapter. This is in Revelation chapter 20. And to set this up, Revelation chapter 20 is close to the end of the book. And you have Revelation 19 talks about the battle of Armageddon. So there's this big battle. The beast and the false prophet are thrown in the lake of fire. Jesus is on the earth. He'd come back, and then he's going to start his reign. And it says, this is Revelation 20, verse 1. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who was the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him to a pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. And after that, he must be released for a little while. And then I'm going to skip down over here, and then it says, verse 7, and when the 1,000 years were ended, Satan will be released from his prison, and he will come out to deceive the nations that are at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for a battle. Their number is like the sand of the sea, and they marched up over the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints, the beloved city. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were. And there will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Okay, so as a Christian, and as somebody, again, like as I started off my process of like basically being on social media and revealing things, I thought we were in the end times. But when I got to that part of the book, and I was like, that's really weird. So in the Bible, we think about the end, like the end times. This is the very end. But for some reason, God throws the beast and the false prophet into the lake of fire, but the devil is not thrown in. He's put in a pit for a certain amount of time. And then he's allowed to come out to deceive the nations. And of course, the way we're taught typically, like we're taught about a millennial reign. It's a very earthly reign. Jesus is in a certain place, and he's ruling with the resurrected saints. And obviously it's a glorious time. But yet somehow when Satan comes back out, he can trick everyone else to go fight against them. And I remember thinking, I always struggle with that idea. Like, well, how would he ever deceive them then?
Mhm.
And I remember thinking like, well, that's gonna suck for them, but I guess we'll find out one day. But I
Dude,
never really considered like, well, what if you were living in that time? Could you have been deceived? And I think with humility, you'd have to say, if he deceives the nations, could you be deceived?
mhm.
I think the answer is yes.
Of
I
course.
mean, if everybody else was tricked, could you be deceived? And I think
That's
to me, it's like it's obviously the devil's not stupid.
no.
The devil's the deceiver. He's tricks. I mean, obviously he deceived the nations before the millennial reign. He deceives them afterwards. So how
Yeah.
does he do it? And I would say that with humility, you at least have to start to ask those questions. What if?
Yeah. Deception doesn't happen by force. That's what makes it deception. So you're not, you know what I mean? It's like, well, so I'm I'm watching the current Lord of the Rings version, and they've got Sauron, and they're making the rings of power and handing them out to the elves and the dwarves and all that kind of stuff. But it's all honey in the ear, right? So deception is not, I'm going to twist your arm and make you do this. Deception is convincing you that it's something that needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
That, so I think using with that word, um, there's intelligence surrounding the word deception as well, because it shows that, like you said, the devil's not stupid, right? So the devil's smart enough to trick people into thinking, most likely, that they're doing good.
Mm-hmm.
Is what my guess would be, right?
Right. So so one of the questions would be, and I remember when I first started making videos about like the end times and the potential mark of the beast, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, all the things like that.
Hmm.
I used to get comments and people would say, yeah, but don't the elites have the playbook kind of? I mean, they know what the book of Revelation says too. So what if potentially they were trying to manifest some of this stuff in order to make it look like it was happening in order to deceive in some kind of way? But of course, I remember thinking like, well, why would they do that though?
Hmm.
I mean, now I can look honestly and I could say there's a couple reasons they could do that. For one, if you think about the way we can be manipulated in certain ways,
Hmm.
just think about like propaganda in the news, the way they would do it. They would make people angry and scared. And that's easily, people can be moved when they're like that, right? Like the Bible tells you not to be afraid. But if
Hmm.
you're scared, I mean, again, go back to 2020. You
Hmm.
think 2021, do you think anybody made any decisions they wish they could take back?
Yeah, exactly.
Lots of them. So, I mean, you
Hmm.
think like if you're scared, that's the whole idea of like the Hegelian dialect, where it's like problem, reaction, solution. So if I can make a big enough problem, well, then I'm sure I can move you to the solution I've already got picked out because you're scared, you're mad, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever it be. But I could have never got you to that position if you calmly, rationally thought about it, or there was no catastrophe, trauma
Hmm.
happening at that time. You would say, no, I don't. That's not worth it. But again, like if they're trying to say, we'll protect you, we'll do this for you, don't worry about it, we've got it,
Hmm.
then that's the situation. So is that possibly a way that you could be deceived? And then the other, obviously, to get right down to it, a big reason to lie about that would be because we're not there and it already happened.
Hmm.
So they would lie about this because they wouldn't want you to know where we were at in the timeline.
Hmm.
And that's when you get into like the old world stuff and you're just saying like there does seem to be something wrong with the timeline. Again, when you try to go research history, I mean like real history, the last 2000 years, maybe
Hmm.
not even the last 200, but like before that, when you try to look between the days of Jesus and like the 19th century, it's a lot more messy than you ever realized it was. Like I said, I really am. I'm one of these people who have tried to like point to certain things in history, and then you see all these anomalies, or you see like that people can't even like historians do not agree about things. Have
Hmm.
you ever heard when people say they can't even agree when Rome fell?
Yeah.
Like within hundreds of years. Yeah, we're not talking about like 6 months. We're not talking about a couple years. We're talking about within hundreds of years. Historians debate when Rome actually fell.
Hmm.
Now, okay, we're talking about the greatest empire we've ever heard of in the whole world.
Hmm.
And then and we're told also that the Romans wrote things down.
Yeah.
So why are we talking about this?
Yeah. It should be there
Unless,
in stone. It should be
yeah,
in stone, right?
unless we're talking about something that again, like that, that's when people would kind of come push back at us and say, well, if all this stuff in the book of Revelation had happened, there would be records of it. Would there?
Mm.
Again, if you think about it, like if your adversary, the devil, is not stupid, obviously that'd be the first thing he might try to do, is he might try to make things murky. I'm not saying
Mhm.
there's no evidence. I'm saying like that it might not be as easy to point to, or possibly he could stretch the timeline out. I know a lot of people have, I'm sure, looked at the things where you have I's and J's that maybe could be ones.
Yeah,
People are
Flamenco's
asking if,
work. Yep.
yeah, have they added 1,000 years? Have they taken 1,000 years away? Is it that
Mhm.
simple? Maybe it's 500 years. Maybe some people say 800 years. The point is, there's where you have like people like Flamenco who say that some of these historical things have happened different places, sound very similar.
Yep.
It almost does seem like we have about 1,000 years of history since Jesus, but it's been stretched out and it's very murky and doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
Can you rely on the historical record to this level? If it's a spiritual thing, it's more than just it's more than just the elites or the controllers trying to do things. We're
Yeah.
talking about like real coordinated evil, not just, you know, the
I
international
think,
bankers. More than that.
JT, I think that's the key, and I mentioned it in one of my recent videos. Like, you have to get past, you got the names, the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and all these front men or whatever, but it's the spiritual. This is a spiritual existence that we're in, for one thing,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to wrap your head around that. And I think if you refuse to get there, then you're doing their bidding. You have to understand that, and that's what their goal has been, is to take us away from the spiritual beings that we are, and have us stuck in that moral relativism, I like to call it, where everything is maybe good or bad or gray. Um, and I think that's part of their trap, right? But like you said, once you understand that this is a spiritual, this goes deep, way deeper than the surface level, and that to the spiritual level, it becomes a lot clearer, and it becomes a lot easier to differentiate as well, I think, when you understand that.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny, like that. Sometimes people, obviously, I'm sure some people are resistant to this concept, but I do think that like when you see like buildings like you show right there, that especially again, we were talking off air, and I was saying that when you go to these places, like like the pictures are obviously incredible sometimes and they're awe inspiring, but when you go to these places,
Hmm.
there is something more, and like it's hard to even like kind of like define like the feelings you get and the things you see, but it is like that there's more to this place when you see stuff like this, because this is more than our existence,
Hmm.
because our existence has been contained to these like cubicles, little aluminum cars, and just like what I mean, everything being single serving things, and then you see stuff like this,
Hmm.
and so you're saying like that there was a different way they did it. Why did they do it different? How do
Yeah.
they do it different? And so I think that if anything, if that's not spiritual, I don't know what is. We just know that there's something that we're all striving for more than what we're doing now. And I think that maybe that's kind of like maybe it's like the midlife crisis in me saying this is not, I mean, it's been a while since I first thought that, but I thought like, this is not enough. This doesn't seem like
Yeah.
this is all there is. And I know a lot of people have thought the same thing. And then you see pictures of the old world and you're like, okay, that seems like more than this.
Yeah. It
And
fills you
so,
up, though. It fills you up, I find, when you start looking at the old world, and the fact that there's way more than they said there was, and it's much more amazing than they said it was. For me, that's what motivates me to do the research and to have this platform, is because what it did for me, right? It fills you with this renewed thirst, I suppose you could say, where that wasn't really there before. Before then, it was, for me, the past was like, okay, Egypt's cool, maybe 10,000 years
mhm,
ago, maybe the
yeah,
timeline's off. Like, it was kind of boring, and I think actually they have those things like the Stonehenge and all that kind of stuff. Those things are there for that reason, to keep it boring and keep it an unattainable mystery.
right.
Or this is really tangible and this is really close to us, and it says a lot about our modern day. When you start digging into this stuff, it's so close to us.
Yeah, it's funny because if you think about it, like I was just did a podcast with Derek Olson, Stargate Voyager, so he talks about a lot of megalithic stuff, giants, and weird kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And I was saying, isn't it funny? So he's going over to England, and he was talking about going over to see Stonehenge. But then he's saying, like, in the meantime, he's like going to a cathedral. It's like one of the tallest ones in the world. And he's like, what is this? And I said, it's funny because, like, okay, so because we've been taught that the people who built Stonehenge would have had no tools, they would have had nothing.
Hmm.
Like, we can't believe how they did it. But if we knew they had like a simple, like, I don't know, just high powered, I don't know, like some kind of excavation tools or whatever.
Hmm.
If they had something, we could say, okay, well, I guess we know how they did it now. And then we'd almost be able to not think about it anymore. But then when you look at the level of like the intricacy, I can't even say that word, intricacies of
Hmm.
like these cathedrals and the weird geometric shapes and the weird things in them. Like, I don't even know what kind of tool you would need to make that. For one thing, if they did that by hand, unbelievable.
Hmm.
But you know what I'm saying? Like the pyramids and a lot of the old megaliths, obviously they're impressive because they're big.
Hmm.
Outside of them being big, I mean, obviously I know there's statues and stuff in Egypt, and there's like some of the like with like the Serapeum and like some of these sarcophaguses, and they're like granite and like laser precision looking weird holes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to the detail level of the old world, they don't compare at
Yeah.
any point. Like when you see like what the Columbian exhibition in
Hmm.
Chicago, let's
Hmm.
just say for 1 minute, that's not all temporary stuff. And I think that people in the
You're
chat
crazy
probably,
to suggest such a thing.
but I mean, if you look at it, you would say that that is more grand than any kind of old megalith you've seen. Like that
Yeah.
place, like whatever that is,
Hmm.
and you thinking like, even if you go with their own narrative that was just temporary stuff, I would like to go to one of those exhibitions. I'd like to go to one of those old world fairs because it's like,
Yeah.
wait, so these people got to go to that, and they, these things were not just like a couple of days. It was like what, 6 months or something, or
Hmm.
I don't even know how long some of these fairs were
Yeah.
supposed to be.
Yeah. That's right. About 6 months. Yeah.
Millions of people going back and forth, and it's like they're all dressed up nice. They must have been doing something. I don't know. They must have had a better way to do things than we are.
Yeah. Have you seen the massive hangars that they were in? Like 300,000 people, 100,000 people in some of them. It's got to be, I don't know how many feet across. It's a single truss. I don't know if you know anything about structure, but
Oh yeah.
that's a hell of an engineering feat for a temporary building to be able to put these curved trusses however many 100 feet across to fit hundreds of thousands of people in.
Isn't it funny too when people tell you that they were all made of just wood and plaster and stuff like that, but when you see the pictures of inside, it's like, no, that's steel in there.
Steel I-beams, yeah, it's ridiculous.
So it's not wood. Like, so we just debunked your claim that it was wood because it's not
Well,
wood.
they'll say
It-
those were built like that for that reason, but the other ones, it's
so
a
they built steel like that and they still tore it down?
who's the conspiracy theorist here, really?
Right. Well, that's what I'm
you
saying.
know?
Like that, it makes. I said that's why I was saying it was interesting when my dad, because he was in construction his whole life and he used to be a lather, and
Yeah.
so I remember when I told him that, and I was saying like, Dad, you know that they're just saying they were just plaster, and of course, I knew when I told him that he'd be like insulted by the idea that it was just plaster. It's like you see what it looks like, and
Mhm.
he's like, yeah, that would be really heavy and it would need a steel frame to support
Yeah.
all that weight.
Yeah.
So there'd be nothing temporary about it.
Hmm.
It would be a real. It'd be even if it was made of plaster, like they said it would be, it would still be one of the most complex, expensive places they would build today.
Hmm.
No question about it. So if you want to destroy it afterwards, fine, you can call it temporary. But it wasn't built to be temporary. It was is built to last.
Don't forget about all the waterworks too, the canal works and the bridges. They
Right.
had were the bridges temporary as well? Was
Right. All the infrastructure that goes into that. Again, like the fountains and all that stuff, all the
yeah.
plumbing, the
Yeah.
electrical work. Again, these places were all lit up at the same time.
Yeah.
There was I just can't even help it. Like I said,
I think
it's insulting. Even look at that. Like, so what picture are we looking at? Where's
this
that
isn't
supposed?
Hungary. This isn't Budapest, Hungary. And it's similar to the buildings we're talking about, though, isn't
Yeah, it
it? Very,
looks like Chicago in
yeah.
those pictures.
Look at all the iconography too, the statue work, and they'll say those were temporary on the World's Fairs as well, right? Um, but I wanted to ask you about the iconography. Actually, that was one of the questions I had written down here. If we're thinking of the little season and the millennial reign, so there's a couple camps in the old world research. Some people think that these buildings were exactly like this in the old world, and there's others that think that they were dolled up by the inheritors to suit their narrative. I'm probably a bit of both, but do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Well, that was, that was actually one of the first things that I said. How can you point to this being evidence of millennial reign of Jesus when I would say that there's pagan imagery on these temples or these
Mm-hmm.
buildings, whatever they are? I guess there's two camps. Well, yeah, one, it's possible that, again, it's my belief based on all the research I've done that the false gods are angels. Okay, so that, like, those are your evidence of other gods. I mean, the Bible, there's biblically, that's the truth, because it talks about the wicked kings in Israel worshiping the whole heavenly host. The heavenly hosts were other angels. Again, if you think about like angels, even the devil is an angel, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's possible that some of the imagery of these beings are not actually, they might not all be bad angels. Let's just put it that way. Certainly they could have also been added afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
We know for sure that it seems like they've scratched dates and labels on buildings that they could say that were later. I think that there was not all the evidence. Well, let's just say all the knowledge in construction techniques were not all lost right
Mm-hmm.
away.
Yeah.
So it's possible that these things could have been added later, and it's also possible that not every one of these things was to be honoring to our God. Again, like that during the millennial reign, people would still have free will to choose.
Mm-hmm.
They could choose rebellion in some points. Like, so I don't know. I mean, I guess the thing is like it's difficult to say, but
Yeah.
I would say that you could put it this way. Let's just say that we're going to say that the millennial reign ended sometime around the 1700s. So the first pictures are not until, over 100 years later or 50 years later. Could they have added things to those buildings in the meantime?
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
For sure. That was my next question, actually. Timeline. This is another thing. I've seen some researchers get it right down to the day. This is when the 1776 is when the millennial, or is when the little season began, and it's 250 years exactly. So it's set to end in 2026. I've seen some guys say that. I'm like, I don't know how you can pinpoint it. So I wanted to get your perspective on that as well, timeline wise.
I mean, again, we're going based on the best knowledge we have. I would say that, yeah, my thought process, at least my starting point, and I welcome being moved off this position if I get presented with better evidence. I would say, just jump off point. Yeah, let's just say the little season started in 1776 because there's a significance to that date. Obviously, mentions on our dollar bill. You got the New Order of the Age. There's all these revolutions going on, obviously, including in America. There's something significant about that day. You think about the Statue of Liberty. People point to that statue being some kind of symbol to Lucifer. I've made videos about that. Lucifer, Apollo. It's got the chain around her ankle that's broken. There's something about that.
Yeah, definitely, I agree.
But at the same time, my buddy Alpha Talks, I know he's likes that theory that it's 250 years. Little season, quarter of a millennial reign. I'm one of those people who say the Bible does not give a timeline on little season. And obviously what it really says is that, as I read it, that the devil is allowed to deceive the nations and he gathers them and then they go march up and they go fight against the camp of the saints. So my thought process is it's however long that takes. So I don't think that there's a specific timeline because obviously there's things, and I believe that based on the way the Bible is and God's nature is that you even think about, like, God says judgment's coming to, like, Nineveh, for instance, and he sends Jonah, tell them to repent. Well, they repented and then they were not judged. Well, later in the Bible they were judged. So it's kind of like that. I believe that our actions during this time probably do factor into how long. Because obviously if everyone turned and they started serving God, I don't think that some of these things would conclude as early. Maybe the devil would not be deceiving as many people. So I think that we do have a kind of a say in this time where there's not necessarily a time. It's a little season. It's open.
It's not depends on the weather. if you
Well,
will.
like I said, it depends on men's hearts. I mean, if you
Yeah,
think about it, even
yeah.
like toward the the days of Noah, it's like there was wicked people, and like eventually there was hardly any. And if God did not send the flood, then righteous men like Noah would not exist, and then there would be nothing worth saving.
Hmm. Hmm. So there's that whole, you have to have that challenge, and you have to have that force to go up against for it to even have any value, right? It's kind of like in the day we're living in now, the people that went up against what happened in 2020, because that was kind of like the catalyst for questioning all of this, for me anyway, getting into this research, getting away from the norms, I guess you could say. That was the catalyst, is like you like come to a point where you absolutely renounce the system that's trying to put you in the pen, and in so doing, you start to unravel everything else that the system has represented. That's sort of what's got me into this research, you know.
Yeah, 100%. I believe that's a Romans 8:20 moment, that God can use all things together for His good purpose if you love Him and you're called to His purpose. Like, so if He can use bad things, because I think that obviously people would look at that and that was a bad time.
Hmm.
But if that didn't happen, everyone would be continuing on their merry way, and maybe something worse would have happened,
Hmm.
and you'd have been the man who built his house on the sand, and then the storm came and everything would be washed away. I think like a lot of people, it was a big wake up call. A lot of people lost a lot of things during those times.
Hmm.
So, but now we're aware enough not to rely on this corrupt system that could literally, like, the rug could be pulled out from under us at any moment now.
My
Like if
question
it
is,
had,
are we aware enough?
well, I mean, no, I mean, I'm not saying we. I would say that, like,
You and
hopefully,
I?
guys like you and I,
Yeah,
that
for sure.
we
Yeah, I thought you meant.
realize that we don't ask if this will happen again. We ask when this will happen again,
Yeah.
and like, what are we going to do? So, like, I think that if something like that happened again, I think you would be naive to be surprised by it. I mean, obviously, you could be surprised at the moment it happens, but I mean, I
Mhm.
don't think like you'd look back and say, "Who could ever saw this coming?" Like everybody who paid attention could have seen it coming.
Do you think we're there? I mean, to ask that question, do you think collectively we would? Do you think the reason they haven't tried it again because they know it wouldn't work? It wouldn't work
No,
out?
I don't believe that. I think
No.
that obviously they have their own time schedule, and again, like, if we're talking about coordinated evil, I think that there's there's things that they really have to there's other factors that they're looking into. But I
Hmm.
do believe that I know a lot of people who talk tough on the internet and say that if they tried that again, blah blah blah. I'm like, guys, like, that they would starve people out if they wanted to do something. Like, there'd be no shots fired, and
Hmm.
when things like is despite what people might say, like, that if that happened again, it's like it's not, there's really no centralized force you go fight against. It's like it would
Yeah.
happen. And I think that people showed what they would do in the last time, and I don't think they would do much different. Maybe
Yeah.
they would, but
I would hope more people would visibly resist it, and sooner. Um,
I think there certainly would be a force, but I think that, again, like, that, fighting against, the state in this kind of way, like to like a level of like the whole world,
hmm.
it being the state.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's almost like another biblical story would be like, to bring it back to like the Tower of Babel.
Hmm.
That when you have a centralized government, it's tyranny. So it leads to this tyranny upon the people, because in their measure of like going together to do great things, it's like obviously they can't have any dissent in this. And like, so where do you go
Hmm.
if that happens again?
Hmm.
There's no real free place to go the way the world would go now. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there is no last bastion of freedom if all the places that are supposedly the free world and democracy decided, well, this is an emergency, and all that's suspended in this time.
Hmm.
Right. So yeah, so I think that's why obviously I know a lot of people believe have taken the black pill in
Hmm.
the old world community, saying there's a reset coming.
Hmm.
It's inevitable. It's cyclical. It's going to happen again.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, I mean, that's, in some
But
ways I don't disagree with them.
yeah, I'm with you. I think in that we have a say in it. I think we definitely have a say in. You mentioned the black pill as opposed to, I suppose, the red pill, which has a
Hmm.
bit more hope. Black pill is a hopeless venture, as far as I know it.
Yeah, it's kind of throw your hands up in it. Well, I would say that the red pill is obviously that we understand what's happening, and to also say it's almost like I would say it is a spiritual condition, as if we say like if these are spiritual issues, it's spiritually not you have separated yourself from this. Like your hope is not in this anymore.
Hmm.
Your hope is in something besides this. So if they take the physical things you have away from you, you're not ruined by that.
Yeah.
Because like that's not what you're clinging to. You're clinging to something more. And I think that obviously is the hope in the little season, because it's a black pill if you don't have any spiritual aspirations and hopes in that.
Hmm.
Because if they take the physical things away from you, that's all you have.
Hmm.
You know,
Which is where they want us, though. That's what they want us to be. Completely reliant on.
that is what I think. That is one of, I believe that is probably the devil's great deception in this time. If you really think about like the story in like the movies like The Matrix, they've taught people only materialism, and suffering and these kind of things and carnal needs.
Hmm.
And so like that's what your whole existence is. And so like you have like the people like with Cyrus in that he'd rather eat a fake steak
Hmm.
than actually live for real.
Hmm.
And I think that's like that's a decision we have to make, because I think at this point we know that the system, the matrix, is like we're like free range slaves in this thing.
Hmm.
Only if only if we're allowed to, only if we want to be in this.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I mean, if you separate yourself from this, yeah, it physically you might suffer a little bit.
Hmm.
You might not always get this, but I do think that there is a freedom in this. And of course, as a Christian, I would say that Satan only has a little time, right? I mean, that's what it says. He has a little time. And obviously, I read to the end of it. Like, eventually, he gets thrown into the lake of fire too. It's like his time is short,
Hmm.
but he's obviously trying to take as many people with him as he can. And
Hmm.
I think that even the old world is only a shadow of what is eternally promised to Christians who have
Hmm.
faith in Jesus. It's like because I don't think that the millennial reign, like maybe like a lot of people, and maybe I can't remember the last time I talked to you. I think more my mindset is that the millennial reign is a heavenly kingdom,
Hmm.
but I think that the physical effects are felt on the earth when the devil was bound. So
Hmm.
the devil's bound, and so we don't have this spiritual oppression, this attack, like this obviously, or you don't have, obviously, again, you don't have elites trying to trap you into small boxes. And there was obviously some kind of freedom in this time
Hmm.
where men could do more. And I think that, again, like that, this is just a shadow. These are the results of it,
Yeah.
that what men could do. And then obviously it's only a glimpse of what is promised.
And if you think of what was destroyed as well, too, what was you know, mountains, caves, caverns, and what it really may have looked like. Again, I'm going back to the Lord of the Rings thing, where they give us this perception of this. It looks like a mountain, but really it's all structure all the way up, and they've got domes, and this is the elven cities and stuff like that.
It's
But
funny. I was just watching a little bit of the Fellowship of the Ring the other day, and I was trying. Of course, I'm really, obviously, I'm always about that code in the movies and like
Mhm.
who do these people represent and this stuff. And of course, I think the easy one is like the elves are angels.
Mhm.
It seems so obvious,
Orcs,
elvish and all this. Yeah,
orcs are fallen angels.
yeah, likely
Orcs,
the orcs are fallen
or,
angels.
or,
I
or the
think.
high orcs, anyway.
I mean, I think the dwarves. Let's just say they might be the people in Israel, maybe, because even like
Interesting.
it.
I never thought of that. Never
Well, I
thought of
just was thinking about that, and I hope that doesn't come off offensive. But I'm saying this is Tolkien wrote this, is not me. But
that.
you think about, where their caverns were. It
Yeah.
was
Hmm.
Mount Moriah.
Hmm.
You know where that is in real life?
I don't know.
That's where the Templars were digging under the Temple of Solomon.
Interesting. I didn't
Yeah,
know
and
that.
it's interesting. So if you have that kind of Kabbalistic idea too, is that Gandalf is saying they dug too deep.
Yeah.
They were digging too much, and like
Too greedily.
it's almost like they knew too much.
Hmm.
They were looking for this more, and of course you think about it, like they go down in there and there's megaliths, but of course they dug too deep, and then they released some super powerful fallen angel, some kind of demon down there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was interesting. Yeah, this whole idea of like this is. I honestly believe that obviously that movie is showing tons of real life symbolism of like how things were and like not necessarily this was like some kind of like accurate depiction of it, but this is symbolic of the struggle we're all dealing with now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the series, the modern series is way too woke, but but it still has some good elements in it too. Like I was mentioning earlier, they're showing how Sauron's deceiving the elves to create the rings, getting on their good side and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting to see that aspect of it as well. Although none of it is literaturally, I don't know, none of it is accurate to the storyline that Tolkien put out. I'm talking about the new series now, the 2 seasons that are.
But the interesting part about it would be that Tolkien, and I think that guys like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, this was not just from their imagination. I believe obviously they had material that they were projecting off, and it was more than just. I think obviously it was some biblical stuff. It was some apocryphal stuff, but I do think it was also some esoteric secret stuff that we don't know about. So it's possible that even the writers, as bad as they are, they might still be trying to use some of the source material that Tolkien and guys like C.S. Lewis were getting their ideas from. So there is something about it that's. I do think that these kind of series, and it's unfortunate that everything gets degraded to the point where now it's just like, this is garbage. But like there's glimpses of good things in it where I think that maybe because it does resonate right there. It does come from some kind of truth that I think we all kind of pick up on. We know that there's something, again, like that's to say, like, it's sad that people want to escape into these fantasy worlds, but I think it's because there's something about it that might come from a true place. And I think that that's why it does resonate.
Yeah, that's what good fiction is. It's telling truth through a story, right? Whereas the opposite, I can't remember this line. Politicians use truth to tell lies.
Mm-hmm.
Fiction is the opposite, something along those lines.
Yeah,
I butchered it, but yeah, it's interesting.
I was going to say, do you want to get into like, so I know a lot of people probably, if they do have any biblical knowledge, they might want to ask why, like, so what kind of proof would I have biblically to say that we're here?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of this, and I think that I believe this is our strongest argument that a lot of these things already taken place. Like that when you go into reading the Bible with what you know, or at least what you think you know, it's easy to read that into the text. So it's very difficult, I think, to be completely honest, to read the Bible with truly fresh eyes, with no preconceived notions or biases. But I know that when you start to read the Gospels, you start to read the letters from the apostles, what you'll notice is all this stuff sounds like it's about to happen right now. It's all imminent. The return of Jesus is imminent. Even when Jesus is there, he's telling them all these things are about to take place. The apostles are very sure all these things are about to take place. And how I know that is that's what Jesus told them. So Jesus told them, in good examples of this, Matthew 10:23. Jesus told the apostles that when they persecute you from town to town, flee to another one. You will have not gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man returns. And again, the Son of Man comes back to Daniel. Daniel describes in Daniel chapter 7 that the Son of Man, who's given authority and dominion, he's coming on the clouds with power. So Jesus, he refers to himself as the Son of Man. So then in Matthew 16:28, he says, telling the apostles, truly I tell you, some of you standing here will not taste death until you see the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. He tells Nathanael in John chapter 1 that he's going to see heaven open. He's going to see the Son of Man with this angels ascending and descending on him. He tells them again, he says in Matthew 21 or Matthew 24, Luke 21, and Mark 13, he says, when he's describing the end times, the return of himself, he tells them that all these things will before this generation passes away, all these things will be fulfilled or take place.
Yeah.
It says in the book of Revelation, after all the things, the very last chapter in the book of Revelation, John is told not to seal this book up because the time is at hand. The contrast is the book of Daniel that talks about the end times as well. And Daniel is told he's told to seal this prophecy up before the times of the end. Jesus is quoting from the book of Daniel when he's on the earth. So he's quoting from the things that were supposed to be sealed up. And then I said, you have in First Peter, Peter says the end of all things is at hand. John says it's the last hour. 1 Corinthians 7, Paul is telling people that it's better for them not to get married because the world as they know it's about to end. So
he's not saying 2,000 years. He's not saying wait for me for a couple thousand years.
It doesn't say that. So the interesting part is so Matthew 24 is the most simple way I think most people can just read it straight through and you get a real good idea of the end times. See, the real problem is our conception of the end times. Even I've tried to explain this to people that the world ends. So we've been taught about a ball, globe, earth, right? So when we're told that world is going to end, we have visions of these probably science fiction movies where think Star Wars, like the Death Star blows up Princess Leia's planet, and that's it. The world ends for them. But even biblically, the world ended in the days of Noah and it started again. You think about post-apocalyptic movies, think about Mad Max. In those movies, the world had ended. Everyone was not dead after the world ended. You got to think about people started over. Think about shows like even what's the new one, Fallout. Fallout, the world ends and then it begins again. Obviously, some people society has to start over again. So in the book of Matthew, it describes the apostles ask him. So here's how the Matthew 24 starts out. That they're walking out of the temple. Jesus had just tore into the Pharisees, was telling them their house was going to be left into them desolate. And then so the apostles mentioned to Jesus, they're pointing out the temple and all the buildings, megalithic structures, probably awesome places. And they were saying, how great is this place, Jesus? Look at all the stones. Look how cool this place looks. And Jesus tells them, truly, I tell you, not one stone will be left upon another. They're all going to be destroyed. And that's when they're like, well, when's this going to happen? What are the signs? And when will be the signs of the end of the age and your coming? And so then he starts to go through the list. And that's what people often cite as oh, well, the end times is here because these are some of the things that Jesus described. What's crazy is, so he talks about wars, rumors of wars. He talks about persecution, earthquakes, all the kind of things, signs in the heavens. And then he talks about he comes back, angels come, and then that's it. After the tribulation of all the things he described. And then remember, the first question they asked him was when. He tells them, before this generation passes away, all these things will take place. Okay, so the first question they asked him was about the destruction of the temple. That happened 40 years. The temple they were talking about was destroyed 40 years after Jesus told them that. So you think about a biblical generation, 40 years in the wilderness. That's 40 years. That happened to those people. And that's why I would say that you go back into the letters to the apostles. They were very confident that these things were going to take place in their lifetimes because Jesus had told them that. And the craziest thing, I never learned this until recently. And again, like I said, somebody who grew up in the church, that the Jewish-Roman War. So in Matthew 21, again, it's a parallel account of Luke 21 is a parallel account of Matthew 24. In Matthew, he mentions the abomination of desolation, but in Luke, he says, when you see the armies encompassing Jerusalem, when you see them circling Jerusalem, you know the desolation is nigh. Well, in 66 AD, the Roman armies surrounded Jerusalem. And interesting, in the book of Daniel, it says that the Gentiles are given 1,290 days to trample the holy city. The book of Revelation mentions that John should not measure the outer courtyard of the temple because it's given over to the Gentiles for 42 months. So again, the Romans surrounded Jerusalem in 66 AD, and in 70 AD, it was all destroyed, burned to the ground completely. Okay, that war was 42 months. Now that is accurate. And it's interesting, like I said, when you actually look into the prophecies, the whore of Babylon in the book of Revelation is Jerusalem. She's the unfaithful bride of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so the beast who destroys the mystery Babylon with fire is literally the Roman Empire. It's this seven-headed beast. Rome was known as the city with seven hills. It
Mm-hmm.
mentions in the book of Daniel there's 10 horns. So from Julius Caesar to Vespasian, the one who destroys Jerusalem, there's 10 kings in Rome. And then his son, they mentions even in the book of Daniel, there's a little horn. His son is the general who becomes emperor after Vespasian, is the
Mm-hmm.
one who destroys Jerusalem. Like, that is a lot of coincidences if this is not pointing to this specific time.
Okay, but I got to ask you then. We got to get into the Schofield Bible and the evangelical outlook on the apocalypse and how that has affected our time.
Yeah, sure.
I'd love to get into that with you because I think that's really important in understanding how they can use um, um, misinterpretation of revelations to steer us and keep us in that state of fear in our modern day.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So do you probably know quite a bit about the Schofield? I only bumped into it. I think it was a recent Tucker Talk with a country music artist.
Yeah, that John Rich. Well, he talks about that. Well, put it this way, like that there was obviously a time where for one, there was obviously a time when people didn't have access to the Bible in the common language, so they're told what it said.
Mhm.
And then there was a time when it was written in the common language, and then there was a time where obviously they started putting study Bibles out and then telling you what it means.
Mm.
It's funny, like that if you weren't taught what some of these things meant, you would just interpret it like it says. Like, again, if you were never, if everybody here who's listening what I'm saying, it's new to them. If somebody told you Jesus came back in the first century, you would read it and you would have no question that it happened. You might have questions about like the aftermath of things, like what happened after that, and like what does that mean for us? But you would never doubt that he said it because he's talking to them. You understand, like, audience relevancy is paramount, right? That Can we just all be honest and say the Bible was not written to us? It was written, you could say it was written for us, but it was not to us. The letters were to the Romans, the letters were to the Corinthians, the letters were to, the church in Ephesus. Like, so when those letters were written, they were written to real people. When Jesus is talking to his disciples, he's talking to them. He wasn't talking to us. So people are writing down what he said to them, what he said to these specific people in these specific cities. Then you learn something from that, but you can't say that he wasn't talking to them. It has to be true to them first. And so what they're trying to do is, for one, there's a lot of the end time stuff comes down to 70 weeks of Daniel. So what they try to do is add 2,000 years to it. But again, it's only because, again, if you believe that these things have not happened, you have to add 2,000. You have to add at least 2,000 years because we're 2,000 years from.
And you need a dark age in there too to cover up whatever may have actually happened.
You don't even necessarily need that. People don't even look into the past, because obviously I think most people obviously are so self-centered that they would just look at the time we're doing here. The book of Revelation starts out with letters to 7 churches. And so dispensationalists, and that's where you get like the Schofield Bible, is like that they add a 2,000 year timeline. They say the churches in Revelation that the letters are written to, they're all symbolic. There's church ages. They're not actually churches. Again, I wonder if these churches realize that Jesus is giving these specific messages about repent because I'm coming back soon. And if you don't repent, judgment's coming upon you too. And if you do repent, you're going to get the crown of life. You're going to eat from you get the crown. You're going to eat from the tree of life. You're going to get descended with me on my throne. All of the promises are good, but there's threats at the same time. So when it comes down to it, the Schofield Bible, at least a lot of people believe, is that it was emphasized this pre-tribulation rapture, that before it ever got bad, there was going to be a rapture. And then it was also really kind of emphasized that this kind of supporting of the future nation of Israel. Like, I guess at that point, obviously it hadn't happened yet. So obviously there's a Zionist movement for this 1948, nation of Israel. And so since then, lots of people have said, oh, you have to support Israel no matter what. This is what it's all about. It's about them. And then God's promises to them. So you can turn a blind eye away from the things that are happening there, because this is This is God's prophecy coming true through this new, that God,
So
this is
the-
what God was going to do was 1948. And then
yeah,
so you
so
need a
this is
third temple.
largely, so that philosophy is largely a result of the Schofield Bible and what came out through that. Is that correct?
I believe that is obviously was sowing the seeds for the acceptance of this, because I don't think that, I mean, it's funny to think about it like that. So if Jesus is telling the apostles about the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple, you could imagine a early first century or second century early church father, not the apostles, after them. They would have said, well, when do you think the third temple is going to be built so there can be an end times?
Hmm.
Like, can you imagine? Like, that doesn't
Yeah.
compute, because you think about all the persecution of the early church, the destruction of Jerusalem. Who is talking about them building a third temple so an antichrist could go in there?
Hmm.
Probably no. Probably nobody was talking about that stuff until there was a new nation of Israel established in
Yep.
1948. So now they're saying, "Oh, well, this is what Jesus, the Bible meant about gathering back together into the Holy Land." And
Hmm.
then there was going to be this, and then there was going to be that. When the Daniel prophecies were all about the building of the second temple and then the coming of the Messiah. Well,
To me,
again,
it's
like the Messiah came, if you believe in
yeah.
Jesus. So, like, he came then. I mean, obviously, we know that he was talking about coming back, but I believe what he was really talking about was he was coming back in judgment, which
Hmm.
I forgot to mention. So, in the Jewish Roman War, which again is interestingly enough not written about in the Bible,
Hmm.
seems like a big omission, because Jesus is prophesying about things that took place and nobody wrote about it afterwards, or at least felt that we needed to know about it in our Bible.
Hmm.
Historians like Tacitus and Josephus, famous Roman historians, they wrote about soldiers being in the clouds during the destruction of Jerusalem,
Hmm.
during the Jewish Roman War. I'm not making that up. You guys can look that up if you don't believe me.
Hmm.
Soldiers were in the clouds that
Hmm.
look like angelic beings.
Hmm.
That was in there. They talked about a star that looked like a sword that rested over Jerusalem for a year during that time.
Hmm.
Like, so there's all kinds of supernatural things that do sound the book of Revelation ish that happen around that time. And I think that that's literally like the day of the Lord, as is described in the Old Testament, is what I don't think people quite always recognize. It's a time of judgment. So
Hmm.
when even the book of Amos, it says, woe to those who desire the day of the Lord, because it's a day of darkness and not light. So when Jesus is describing that the sun goes dark, the moon turns to blood, the stars do not give their light, and then this happens, he's not talking about a good time. He's talking about, like, you can imagine for the people he's talking to, his audience, this is the end of the world.
Yeah.
It is, like I said, it's the end of the world for those people at that time. But now we're taught that no, it's this. But again, like, there's interesting how, like, the translation issues can be that when if the Bible says earth, we still think about the whole earth, right? Not
Hmm.
just if I just grabbed a handful of dirt, I could say this is the earth, right? I
Hmm.
could say land. And if I said the whole land, you might have, if I told you land where we're living in the same place, you might have a different idea of
Hmm.
how big it is, what we're talking about, the world as we know it. Again, I do think that some of these things. So when he's telling these people, this is their world.
Hmm.
This is the earth is here, the land is here, and all that stuff happened at that time. Now, I do think that there's things, and we did a podcast about this recently, was the judgment on Rome. So Rome did fall. Like, when did it fall? That's the good question. We have a pretty interesting video about 536 where lots of revelation type signs happen. Again, if it was 536 the year it actually happened, well, we know the sun went dark that year for 18 months.
Hmm.
There was famine, there was plague. Literally, the bubonic plague was right after that, where like 50 to 100 million people died, which would be half the world population.
Yeah.
Wars, all the things, and all that happened. That basically, all that happened. Rome fell, and then we were ushered into the Dark Ages, where
Yeah.
not much happened, right?
Well, I was thinking of the the Schofield aspect of it and the coming, rather than it having happened. It's a way to falsify the timeline, and it's also a way to hide the millennial reign, is by saying, well, that hasn't happened yet. So don't look back here at all these buildings because that couldn't possibly be anything worth looking at, because so it's a part of the timeline deception, and it's got the same names written all over it, right? The Rothschild name is linked up with the Schofield Bible, right?
Well,
So it's
what's funny is like as this actually kind of fits too, because I was saying like that when you think about really fleshly things, and it's easy to do when you like look at buildings like this. So if we're taught, like I think a lot of people wouldn't believe because they're like, okay, so if this is the evidence, like the buildings over here, if that's our evidence of the millennial reign,
mhm,
well, it's easy to say I don't believe it because I don't have history books to back it all up.
mhm,
But I believe that again, like that kind of thing is a spiritual thing, and I think that it's kind of like that your spiritual condition would have symptoms like in a good in a good or bad way, right? Like of what you could do during this time. So what we're taught based on even biblical knowledge is that obviously there was hardly any Christians during the first century, right? Like there wasn't many,
mhm,
right? Everyone would agree with that. So what we're taught about that during the millennial reign is the main thing the Bible says. It doesn't say a lot. It just says the devil is bound and he's not allowed to deceive people. Okay, so there's not a lot of Christians, and all of a sudden there is.
mhm,
Okay, so how long were all these Christians really just multiplying around the world? I
mhm,
think that that is your evidence of the millennial reign more than anything else, because I can tell you that I can't show you specifically, but all I know is at some point the world became Christian, and obviously you can have your conspiracy theories about how that happened. Point being is there was an acknowledgement that the guy who got crucified by the Romans was God at some point, or the Son of God, however you want to say it. He died and rose again, and he was Lord. He was the King, right?
mhm,
Whether you guys agree, I mean, I would say that the majority of the world agreed on that point. And then, so I believe that during that time, this is what men were capable of. And then
mhm,
after that time, again, it was funny. Like you'd even see like the way it's described is the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is when the opposite is. It's almost like this time where like they try to undo that
mhm.
knowledge.
Yeah.
That never happened. That was a bad time. And
Mhm,
if you think about it, if the devil was in a dark place, the
mhm.
dark ages was when he was down for 1,000
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
And
and
then
the Enlightenment's when he
enlightenment
comes out,
is when he was coming out. Yeah, it
right?
would have been
Yeah,
really dark for somebody
yeah,
during
nicely
that
done.
time.
So whose perspective are we looking at history from, right? I suppose when we look through that lens. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. So I think that I do believe that this could have been the evidence of this. And maybe this is kind of maybe like maybe some of this stuff could be what if God would have wanted for man. Maybe that's like some of
Mm,
his original ideas for man. Knowing that not everyone would be perfect in this time, but like
mhm,
that man could do more. And maybe man, I mean again, like you think about it like that if you were not dependent on your paycheck to heat your house, have
mhm.
light, and that kind of things. Like maybe you
Yeah,
would be free to do more for other people. And
yeah, community oriented. Like
yeah,
I see a lot of aspects of community with, you get markets, you get central meeting places in the old world. It's a completely different structure of society. At least they've moved us away from that structure of society. This modern day that we find ourselves in is there's no real value in community and interacting, and that's what they tried to take away from us with 2020 again, right? Is
yeah,
interacting with each other. So they definitely don't want us talking to each other and interacting. It's so it enriches the spirit when you interact, I think, and they definitely don't want that. They want us just connected to our devices, it
yeah.
seems.
I definitely think that God put us here for. I mean, like we don't get all the fulfillment in our lives without each other.
Hmm.
And yeah, to separate us from each other is like is death.
Hmm. There's somebody here is asking. A lot of people in the church are speaking about this.
Well, it depends what you mean by the church. I think that again, again, way we've been taught, the way things are, like they would say the church, and then people would say which one, and they would be pointing to different buildings. But again, as the believers would be the church. But like guys like me, who went to churches my whole life, no,
Hmm.
they never talked about this ever. And if
Hmm.
I told people this in the church I used to go to, this would be the first time they ever heard any of the things I'm saying,
Yeah.
unless
Yeah.
they saw it on social media, because no, this stuff is not taught in churches.
Hmm.
And I said, but the funny part about it is like that, again, it's a biblical understanding of like that maybe the eschatology we've been taught is a gross misunderstanding of what it actually is.
Yeah.
Because that was funny. I just posted this clip of like Tucker Carlson and Glenn Beck talking again. You mentioned Tucker Carlson. He had Glenn
Hmm.
Beck on, and Glenn Beck said he was talking to some biblical scholars, and they were talking about the end times, and he was basically schooling them, or the scholars were schooling him on the end times. And he's like, "Dang, this all sounds like it's happened before." He's like, and I was like, "I know everyone says that, even the apostles said that, and they were wrong."
Hmm.
And I said, so I thought it was funny that he said that, because it's like
That is interesting.
you would never get somebody like I would say 99% of people who, towed the mainstream Christian line would never be as bold to say that.
Hmm.
But I think that if you really, you gave them like the truth serum, they would have to say that they were wrong, because I think that the thing he wasn't wrong about was, yeah, the apostles surely did think that it was the end times.
Hmm.
And like I said, when you're willing to accept that maybe, again, like we said, you take out that eraser and decide to erase things and say, I might have got that wrong. If you're willing to be wrong,
Hmm.
then you could say, it's a lot easier to say that Jesus just meant what he said, and I don't have to try to explain. Like, I don't have to apologize for him. I don't have to bend myself into intellectual pretzels to say he wasn't talking to the people he was talking to. The apostles weren't wrong. Maybe I was just misunderstood exactly what they were talking about.
Well, to me, it sounds like there's an intentional deception. Again, going back to the whole Schofield thing, that somewhere along the line, the intention was to deceive people into thinking that this hasn't happened yet. So it almost seems like it fits, again, with the old world stuff that we're looking at. Because it seems to have convinced a lot of people that um, that we're on that timeline, that the Revelations timeline. That biblical teaching through I guess the Schofield the gentleman who came up with that, the
Yeah, well, I think
modified
there's
version.
Schofield and there's John Darby, and I think these guys
Darby.
are kind of they're kind of working together, and like I guess Schofield, I think Darby, I'm not sure who exactly was the one who put the study notes in the Bible, but yeah, they're kind of directing people, and again, but it's at the
Mhm.
same time, it's like they're directing people in a way that they should still know better. I mean, like they're still reading the same scriptures, but it is difficult when you think about like obviously the guys who line pastors' pockets, and then you think about like 501(c) churches in America that get tax breaks and this kind of stuff. It's naive to think that they're not also being directed in the way they can talk about things.
Of
Even
course, of course.
even it was interesting. I was just talking to my brother about this today, that I had noticed stuff around my local churches. I went to one a couple of years ago, and I thought it was mostly a decent message. I remember at one point I said to the pastor, I said, "Hey, that was a pretty good message," and he seemed so weird about it. And I thought that was strange. That was an odd reaction. I thought that he'd be, flattered that people complimented on what he said,
Mhm.
but he seemed weird about it. It was very off. And then I remember seeing some other sermon he did that I did not agree with, and then I saw somebody else do the exact same one, and I was like on the internet because I saw people
Ooh.
like me, and I started to see like, oh, wait a minute. So he's in this one church organization
Mhm.
where these big organizations plant churches in different places.
Mhm.
And this is pretty interesting. If you guys, this is obviously some inside baseball to the church business.
Mhm.
And basically what it sounds like is that these big organizations, like I'm not going to, well, obviously I'm kind of questioning their intentions, but
Mhm.
it's like they're setting up franchises.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of like that they invest in these churches, and what they do is they give out money, and they give out, believe it or not, they give out sermons for a lot of these churches
Mhm.
to start out. So
Mhm.
they basically put them through this training, and then it's like, yeah, it's kind of like if you bought a Chick-fil-A. They're not going to let you just go start your own Chick-fil-A without actually knowing how to be like the
Yep.
corporate Chick-fil-A. So that's what they do, and it's kind of like they have a business model, and they invest in you, and then obviously you pay them back, and at some point they got lots of people to pay them back,
Yeah.
and they're doing quite well. But I was thinking about like, this is, I can't verify this, and I've looked in this, I've tried to look into this a little bit, but the one guy was say like they give you this amount of money and they give you the first 100 sermons. So it's almost like if I did that for you, like here's your business model. This is your starting a church for dummies. And then it's like, so how is everyone how does everyone miss this thing? For one, they don't ever talk about this kind of stuff.
Mm.
And for two, obviously there is a coordinated message going out, and the people who obviously are very successful at this thing, they know how to become, mega churches and things. Yeah, they're going to drown out like guys like me. Like I'm just some guy. I'm some guy on, TikTok and
Yeah, it's like the
Instagram.
big stars, right? Yeah, it's interesting to get that perspective. It reminds me of the meme. You've probably seen the meme. This is dangerous for our democracy. And it's all the different news networks saying this is. It reminds me of that, but all the churches are just giving the same sermons. If they're all in that same string of that chain of churches, it's like a homogenized message.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, and I think that a lot of us, if we're being honest, like that when we are waking up to the lies in the culture, it's like, yeah, that's obviously, a red pill or black pill, depending who you talk to. It's like when you find out, yeah, they were lying. They weren't even telling you the full truth in the church.
Hmm.
And the funny thing about it is like sometimes it's not necessarily you've been lied to. You think about fake news. Fake news a lot of times is presented in this story was completely wrong. I
Yeah.
think most of the time fake news is what they do not report on.
Hmm.
So it's like
Yeah.
lies by omission. So it's like the
Yeah.
thing you don't tell somebody that's true that you should.
Hmm.
And I think that might be one of these situations where, again, it's almost like the apocrypha and stuff like that.
It's
I
like a
was
look here, not there, right? Look here,
Well, it's
not
like, well, it's just like the fact that we believe the Bible, and if it's not in the Bible, it's not true. And it's like, what about the older Bibles that had more books in them?
there. Hmm.
So that's the first like thing where you get questioned about. It's like, so we're talking about the book of Enoch and things like that, and they're like, that's not in the Bible. It's like, well, it used to be. Like, which Bible? You mean like the newest one? The one, obviously those books are really old.
Hmm.
You know, there was a time where they just called it scripture and there was no Bible. So there was scrolls of scripture and then everybody read all of them.
Hmm.
But now you're telling me I can't believe anything that's not in the Bible that's been put together by men multiple times and things taken out, put in. Well, maybe it's not put in, but like taken out. And so we start to say, like, well, maybe I could just read it and I could just verify it's in it. It's like people start to get weird about it. So they'll let their kids read Harry Potter, but they don't want me to read the book of Enoch. It's like, well, let me, like obviously, if I believe there's a Holy Spirit and I believe that he's going to direct me on what's true and what's not, and I already know what's in the Bible, I'm not reading stuff that's contradicting it. I was like, well, maybe this could be true.
Hmm.
And I think that's like a lot of things. It's like, well, why don't you want me to know that? Well,
Hmm.
I'm gonna see. Oh, don't worry, I'll just gonna go look.
Well,
And
yeah, it makes me think of our modern day. They really want to move us away from the Bible and Christianity in general. So you have to ask yourself the question, why? Right? There must be something to it.
well, I think that at the end of the day, like I think that's why, like when I look into the old world stuff, it does make sense. I mean, it makes sense that even based on the history we know that again is not necessarily perfect, that there was a time where obviously there was a biblical time, there was a time after that, and then at some point the whole world became Christian, and then slowly they've been trying to, or quickly as they can, try to move us away from that and try to make it seem like it was the worst time and all the things, obviously all the things that are said about the dark ages and what religious people did. And I'm not saying that religious people were good. I'm just saying like that, like there's a reason why they try to tell us that this is a better way than it was.
Hmm.
But again, like I said, can we trust them? They're the ones that are telling us that it's true.
Hmm.
I can tell you the way that they're doing it right now does not seem great. I think that I think the way we're taught about the dark age, like I said, I don't. How did they have time to build that? Based on what we're taught about, like the serfs and the medieval times, like when did they have time to do that?
Well, it feels like for me, right, we're in a time where everything is being put out into the open, and then we are being forced to make a choice. After they're putting all this satanic imagery and all this symbolism out in front of us. Not even symbolism anymore. They're outright showing people that pure evil is what they represent. and I feel like people are being given a choice to renounce it and move toward God or not. That's kind of how I look at society in our modern day right now.
No, I 100% agree with you, because I know when I first started making content, that's a lot about what I talked about, because I was first making end times videos, but then I was making, kind of like exposing subtle things in, in the culture, that like, this is not of God, this is evil. Like, you see what these symbols came from? You know what this actually means? You know what they're actually saying when they're doing this? And
Hmm.
so I made lots of videos about that. Well, they made my job way easier, because all they did was just like put just completely just satanic, just garbage in there. Just like, this is grotesque. Even my
Hmm.
mom I was talking to my mom today, and she was talking about, do you see that Justin Timberlake video? And you're like, so you're thinking about, like, so Justin Timberlake, Disney Channel guy, right? Came from like the Mickey Mouse Club,
Mm.
and he's in this boy band. And then I'm not sure, because I'm not keeping up with him too closely, but he's got like that Trolls movie where he's,
Hmm.
so like obviously he's doing this little teeny bopper thing still for kids. But then his latest like music video, it's like literally it's all in red. He's like barfing out black stuff, and I think he's killing himself, and he's putting himself in the trunk
Really?
of a car. Oh
Oh
my
no.
god, like it is like, wow. So obviously, like, not that I'm surprised about almost any of these people anymore, but
Hmm.
like, you see let's just say there's a pattern been established here,
Hmm.
where like
Obvious pattern. It's an
yeah,
obvious pattern.
a very obvious pattern. See, like something like Taylor Swift, where she's shown again, like, I don't, she's not kind of like a Disney person, but like she's kind of this little young, cute pop singer singing about cute love songs and stuff like that. And then before you know it, she's wearing a satanic Baphomet costume in one of her music videos. She's
Hmm.
doing like witchcraft stuff on stage.
Yeah.
And she's the one who's obviously getting the push beat. The whole industry, they're trying to push her out in front of our faces as much as she can. And it just so happens her boyfriend is sponsored by Pfizer and all this stuff. And you're like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you guys believe in coincidences like that? It's like,
So it's obvious for people like us when we look at that.
yeah,
So
this is
why?
a work, obviously, but and you're kind of saying like that. That was one of the things I really felt like God showed me, was like, all right, the lines are being drawn, right? Like, so he's not. There's at some point you're gonna be like, well, who could have seen that coming? Like, like I missed that completely, right?
Hmm.
No, you couldn't have. Like, somebody's saying like, you didn't know that Taylor Swift was bad. It was funny, even like, I'll say this for me, because like I said, I'm not perfect. I liked all the music, and I do like music. And at one point, like, knowing so much that I know now about the things I know,
Hmm.
it even says in the book of Ecclesiastes, with much knowledge comes much sorrow.
Yeah.
I used to like that band Incubus, and I was
Oh
like, but then I was listening to it, and I was like, the band is called Incubus. You know what that is? That's a demon. Like,
yeah.
the incubus and the succubus, like,
Hmm.
those things are real entities. And so you have to ask yourself, why did they name themselves that?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
and like I said, guys, I'm sure people in the chat, I know you like them. I do too. I like the music.
Hmm.
But at some point I had to say, I can't listen, and like, knowing what I know now, I can't listen to that anymore.
How about Diddy? You big on Diddy or? Sorry.
Well, he's not bad yet too. Did he do anything bad recently?
I think he's all right. Oh man, we'll leave that one alone. I think we'll leave.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's funny. Like, he's the like the Harvey Weinstein of like the music industry, right? We're like, well, everyone's shocked that he did something bad, right? Like, everyone has known that guy has been dirty
Mhm.
for forever. And now you look at his names, you're like, Puff Daddy. That's kind of weird. That's a weird name.
Yeah.
P Diddy.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Mhm.
Like, you think they're saying something without saying it? Yeah, like
Yeah.
Puffy. Like, no, no, like, not him too. Yeah, so obviously it's very similar in the way that once Harvey Weinstein, like, everyone was willing to acknowledge that he was a scumbag, they're like, the floodgates open. Do you know what he did? Can you believe that? It's like, yeah, everyone can believe it, because you guys have been all hinting at it and laughing about it at award shows for the last 15 years.
Yeah. It's all there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, so that he's a good example of that, where like, when you can see it,
Yeah.
none of this stuff was ever hidden. Like, once
No,
you
you're
know what
right.
you're looking, once you know what you're looking at, none of this was ever that subtle.
Yeah. So that's what I think that's what I'm trying to do is just get more eyes, getting outside of the matrix, starting to think about things away from their programming, and take back our search for truth. At an individual level as well. I encourage everybody to do their own research and come up with their own theories, because it's just JT and we have our own ideas on what we think the past looked like, but they're just ideas, right? So the more
That's
people,
incredible. Where's that building at right there?
that's in Russia. That's St. Petersburg. Yeah.
So, do we know? So I haven't done as much in depth about this, and I know I probably should. Is like Tataria.
Hmm.
So Tataria is obviously a lot of people just who don't know just would label everything old world Tataria.
Not a fan of the word, to be honest with you, because of that. But
Yeah,
yeah.
I know, but I think that's I almost feel like now I almost feel like convicted to go look into it more, because I do think, like I said, I have my maps up here,
Hmm.
and obviously there was a time where obviously a major part of Russia, if not all
Oh,
of
yeah.
it, was Tataria.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what isn't that a weird thing? Isn't it kind of funny to just think about like that?
Well, and it was also like walled off from us for most of the last century. So
Right,
everything.
so there is something to it, I believe, that not to the
Absolutely.
level of it being like the worldwide empire, but it's like, so why didn't they tell us about that
Yeah.
empire?
Yeah. It's a good
Seems
question. It's a good
it does
question.
seem weird, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then there was a lot going on, I think, in that time, and a lot of people were killed during that time. People that probably knew a lot about the past. They were erasing the past in real time. In front of overtly erasing the past. I think there, and in China, it happened in China.
Yeah,
So
well, that is one of the things that I can't remember if we talked about the last time we did a stream, but I was saying it is something like for people who live in the West, it's very easy to kind of like, I don't know, maybe to block out things that happened in the East, where the level of death that happened in Asia
hmm.
that is unfathomable, like by any human standards, like the purge that happened in Russia during like the Russian Revolution in the communist times, and
Yeah.
then obviously in China, that it's easy for us to say, well, communism's bad, but it's like, what if it was something more than that? Because we're talking about like on a level that you can't even comprehend. Don't
Hmm.
want to. And I
No.
don't blame people for not wanting to dwell on it, but what if it was to cover up something massive?
Yeah. Yeah. I hear what you're saying, and there probably is a lot more to that whole Tartaria thing, um, like the literal Tartaria, and the part of the map that we find on the old. Yeah, the part that we find in the old maps that's been sort of hidden from us. But I don't know how you can where you go about digging deep. That's the problem. Is all we can do is use the visuals that we have and infer,
Hmm.
because there was a campaign to erase it. Right, it was a successful campaign, pretty successful campaign to erase a lot of this stuff, I think.
Yeah, the one thing I kind of find a little bit suspect is like that you have so historically, like the Russians and the Germans have kind of been the bad guys, you
Hmm.
know, like, for the back of a letter, a
Yeah.
better word. But so when you see like those early pictures that you kind of think about the Erewhon documentary, and he's talking about St. Petersburg, he's
Hmm.
talking about places in Germany, and those are the places that have no people in them.
Hmm.
And then he's showing the contrast in like Paris and London, and they have people,
Hmm.
the good guys, right? So it is kind of interesting that those places had nobody in them during
They
those
erased
early
them.
pictures.
Yeah, a lot of the Russian or the German areas are pretty amazing as well too. Looking at
Yes.
a lot of the old structures, and even German engineering, even in our modern day, is something anyone knows. Oh wow, with German engineering, that's going to be good, right? So there's a
Mhm.
trickle down through time as well. And then World War II, when happened with Hitler and all that kind of stuff, it's like, I don't know. History is written by the winners, right? So I'm not going to say I question everything. I do question everything they tell me actually about World War II as well. Because I'm not hanging my hat on anything. I can't. We just don't know enough, and that's pretty close. That's only like 60 years, 80 years ago, I guess now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting that that what what he was looking for was a third Reich, and I think that wasn't that like really about a third 1,000 years.
Mm.
I thought
Yeah,
about the other
1,000-year
day. I was
reign.
listening to something else, and you're thinking like, so he was talking about 1,000 years, and I kind of thought like, I remember hearing that back in the day. I'm like,
Yeah,
why only 1,000 years?
I remember that too.
So
Yeah.
what if it was like after the other 1,000 years?
Mm.
You know, like
Mm.
what? Because that's kind of odd. Because it's like, because I don't think in those kind of terms, right? 1,000 years. It's like if I was I don't know, the head guy in some place, I'd be like, well, I'd kind of be more concerned about 100 to 50 years because it's about how long I might live and maybe my
Totally.
kids.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it is interesting to think like, what do you mean? So what do you mean a third?
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
I guess I've never really looked into that, but I did think about that. Like, so what if it was piggybacked on another 1,000 years?
Yeah,
And you
that's
think about like even like the Holy Roman Empire,
yeah.
wasn't that like wasn't that in Germany?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there is something to all that, like that the aspirations of what he thought he was doing in that kind of time. I'm not
Yeah,
saying this is no defense of him, but it's like maybe it's like that. Was there more knowledge of what had just taken place? And obviously, the answer is yes. There was more
yeah.
knowledge. No, the real question is, what's true about that? I don't know.
What's becoming clear over time is, well, I mean, the Allies were led by Stalin and Churchill, and Roosevelt, I guess, I don't know.
Freemasons.
Oddfellows, definitely. Like,
Yeah.
I've got an Oddfellows video coming up soon, and they'll be in it. A couple of those guys. It's like those are the heroes. I don't know. There's something wrong with their history. I'm not saying the other side are heroes. I'm saying there's something wrong with the way we've been told the history, and it's worth looking into for sure. For all of us, probably a lot of people that are alive that had people serve in that war probably weren't told much about it because people were so shell shocked and you didn't talk about the war. Um, I don't think a lot of people were open about their experiences during that time. It was something that it was like COVID for the normies now. We don't talk about it. It just didn't happen. We just, I think the war was similar in that respect as well. You don't talk about the war. You just move forward and we'll have our boom.
Well, it's interesting, like that we hear the stories, like especially in America, about like General Patton,
Hmm.
and then he was like, "No, we need to go all the way to Moscow." Like,
Well,
and basically, he got removed from his positions for saying things like that
I said we were
because
fighting the wrong enemy.
yeah, because it's like, yeah, who do we go to war against, and then it's not necessarily support of the other guys they defeated, but it's at the same time like why was it, so why was it ever ever allowed to be a Cold War like that?
Hmm.
And they tell us that the will to fight them was not there, but at the same time, obviously they knew who they were dealing with.
Hmm. Hmm.
They could have let them. They didn't have to. They could have liberated parts of the other part. They could. Yeah, they never had to help him,
Hmm.
but they
Hmm.
did, and obviously they established these things. And I think most people don't realize who also was part of the invasion of Poland. Like, like they divided up Poland at the very beginning of the war. Like what side Stalin was on at the very beginning of the war.
Hmm.
It's almost like people forget that part was like that they made a deal first.
Hmm.
But
No, and it changes over time, and certain things get erased, and yeah, that's why it's good to keep it into consciousness, and it's good to toss the ball around with these ideas rather than just not talking about it. You know,
well,
uh,
I mean, again, like it's I think that a lot of people, especially like I know that people that woke up in 2020 w- who have woke up for real. I mean, again, we probably all have our blind spots, but we noticed that like people who think that you think some of the people are awake, and until they start putting flags in their bios, depending on what the news tells them, and you're like, wait a minute,
yeah, yeah,
are you seriously like you understand like that's exactly what they would use. So if then you go backwards, where there's these certain topics, and again, it's so funny how certain topics that are very pretty old. I mean, it's funny. I was just joking the other day saying I have gotten so much trouble for talking about 9/11 on different social media apps. So that's why I said I had to go to Rumble to do a podcast about it. You can't talk about stuff about World War II. Obviously, I don't even say certain names about
yeah.
that thing because we're for fear of censorship. And you're like, but why?
Hmm.
Like, so why does my opinions about that matter? Again, I'm just some guy. Like, but there is you really do think about it. Like that does kind of remind you of what we're told about that time. Like you can't even talk about that.
That's what they want us to. They want us to continue that in that vein. That's why we have to talk about
So
it.
if there is censorship in that way,
What are they
it
hiding?
must be because there's something there.
What are they hiding? Exactly.
It's because if it was nothing there, then they'd be like, this guy can make himself look like an a-hole, as much as he wants to. It's not the truth, but they're censored because there is something there.
Yeah. Did you want to share some of your boots on the ground? Do you have time, or what do you?
Yeah, sure. So I was telling Chris that over the weekend I went to Raleigh, North Carolina, and if you guys are not familiar with that, that's the capital of North Carolina. And so, pretty cool place, really nice little area. It's got lots of colleges around there. It's got NC State is right in Raleigh, and I think like Duke University. I was kind of bummed I didn't get to go to Duke. That was about 30 minutes away, but I didn't really have time to go there. That place looks like
Old world.
Medieval castles and stuff.
Really? Duke? I got to look up Duke.
Yeah, you should look up Duke. Duke's got some like old churches and stuff. It's funny that a lot of these old college campuses have very elaborate cathedrals and stuff there. I just think that, I mean, I know, I'm sure that I'm not telling you something you don't know, but it does seem like these universities is a place that stuff like that gets hidden.
Absolutely. And control the information and become the authority on the information, for sure. Yeah.
It is interesting the way, that all that stuff's presented, and like you think about even the way that secret societies start. They start in like these fraternities. Think about like guys like George W. Bush and Skull and Bones at Yale University, and like the Phoenix Club at at Harvard. Yeah, like it's kind of funny. It's like one of those things where you don't even like really look into till you like think about it. Like it's just things that are. But like, how did these universities ever get so much money to do the things they've done if they were just school?
Yeah.
Right.
And then build those things. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna try to look up. Okay, so I got my pictures of Raleigh. Now, first, I want to show you. Should we look at that tower first? Near
Yeah, absolutely. We looked at this before we went live here.
Yeah, so check this out, guys. This is the bell tower in Raleigh, North Carolina, and this is just outside of NC State University. And so if you see, it's kind of got like these 4 kind of cauldron looking things around it, this tower and this base. The clock still works. And yeah, it's the dog.
And when did they say this was built?
This was built. Let me try to look this up. I'll try to get. I want to say they said it was built in the early 30s. Let me see.
Oh yeah, the WPA, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So much was built with the WPA.
Yeah, the Memorial Bell Tower. So I found a couple of things really suspect about this thing. Let me see. I can. So it says that it was built in. So it's 115 feet, and they say it was built in 1937. The funny part was when I was trying to find construction photos of it. I'll have to find this. It's so funny. Yeah, it's just like the pictures do not look like they don't look like real construction. And again, I think that's the funny part is like sometimes I'm sure you probably do the same thing. Like at first I thought, well, they can really only hide stuff from like maybe like the 1800s. But then when you actually look into like the construction stuff that they mentioned that happened in, let me share this. This is pretty funny right here. So these are, let's see. Yeah, this is funny right here. So here's some pictures of the construction of it.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so obviously I see part of it. The funny part is like there's no steps there.
It's just straight up the grass. Yeah, I've seen that before too.
You know what it looks like to me?
Digging out.
Do you see what I'm seeing there? Does it not look like the steps are under the ground?
Oh, that's what I mean. Yeah, they're digging it out, right? Like a mound, like they do with the mounds.
Yeah, so look at that.
Yeah, now there's the
Yeah, that's
taper.
great. You know what? Actually, I just noticed that. That's true. Like you see the steps are under the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
That seems, but it's funny. It's like, do you think that they probably photoshopped the top of the top, the top off?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Yeah.
That is weird,
That's
right?
why I think World War II is like the massive pivot event in our consciousness, and then we can't see behind that as much as we try. Because this is
Yeah,
37, you said? 1937? It's not
yeah,
that long.
that's 37. So that's not that old, right?
No.
So you're thinking like, so how, I do think that like even I thought you could not hide that stuff.
Hmm.
But so here's the funny part. So like again,
Here we go.
here's a
Yeah.
quote from Isaiah on one of the doors there, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares.
Hmm.
Interesting. So this is again, so this is the part where we're get into. This is funny. So this was an inscription on here dedicated by the alumni to the glory of Almighty God. And again, like most of these kind of old world looking things, this thing looks very, very well done. Except for you actually, when you pay attention to the etching on this thing, it does not actually look all that impressive. And when I show you the next picture, this is funny. So to preface this, like, so this obviously this is blocked in a certain way, and then there's a parallel blocking of lettering here, and this will crack you up when you see this. Have you guys spotted?
Can you zoom it at all a little bit? Are you able to?
I think I see.
There you go. Yeah.
Okay.
And
in the memory of those who served.
Ved.
So like literally serve did not fit in the blocking, so they put SRV, SER, and then VED on a separate line.
That's great. Is there a dash after the R there? Or is that just...
There is a little dash.
There is a little dash. Okay, good. Good. Whew.
I mean, come on, guys. Like what is that?
It's funny they're putting it up in 37 as well.
Well, so what's funny again, like, so do you see what this thing says? So it said it was 1937, but this says down here, Anno Domini 1921.
Yeah.
And this is Anno Lumini 5921. So I don't know if they're saying that's because it has something to do with when World War I ended. I'm not sure if it wouldn't.
Yeah, it's inconsistent for sure.
But again, like if you look at the etching is not done very well. If you really, with the critical eye of how well everything else is done.
If you ran a level across that, it'd be interesting to see how they line up.
Yeah, it doesn't look, it's not perfect. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I just think that's interesting that, yeah, like that this is on there. And again, it does not fit.
Mm-hmm.
And there you go. So this tower is by the Works Progress Administration of North Carolina in cooperation with the sponsor, the North Carolina State College and its alumni, 1935, 1937.
Yeah, I'm glad you shared this because I've got a video coming up about the Works Progress Administration because so much happened. And that's the same people that were responsible for digging up dinosaur bones and making all sorts of canals and stuff like that. It's like, geez, they crammed it in there right before World War II.
Yeah. So that's it's just interesting as all. And so this is right around the college right here. This is very in close vicinity of here.
Yeah. This is NC State.
Yeah, NC State. See, look at that. It's like they got little, kind of almost flower places built out around the windows.
Yeah, the wells. Yeah, and they've got a band of sandstone. It looks like there, or whatever it might be. That's interesting too.
Yeah, so there you go, NC State. There's actually a really nice. That place looks pretty old. Right there.
That could easily be a city hall or a courthouse, something like that.
For sure. And then I found this old church. This church was really big. The scale probably is not.
This one.
It's really big. This was again, like you obviously have the big dome.
Yeah.
Bell tower.
That's weird. Weird looking structure too. You have to wonder what kind of modifications. Maybe the WPA they were doing a lot of modifications too, right? Or,
yeah.
that kind of
thing.
Thing.
Obviously those doors are massive. statue of Jesus. Let's see. Yeah, like I said, it was more like you see the people. If you see the people in that picture,
What's the
it's like
denomination on that? Do you know?
I think it was Church of Christ. I'm not even sure.
That's it. That is big.
Yeah,
Again,
it's like it's really hard to kind of get the scale. And so then this is downtown Raleigh right here, and this was again like this was kind of reminiscent when I went down to DC, that there was just buildings, all these old buildings all over the place down here. And so this is your North Carolina State Capitol building right here.
All right, give us.
And again, like I said, you do not really get the full kind of vision of how big the scale is, that these columns are absolutely massive. And it's funny, I'll show you a picture. I know they said you go to the inside. This place burned down at one point. Of course.
Oh, of course. Fire narrative.
Yeah, like it had to burn down at least one time. But you kind of see like there, you see people walking around it.
Yep. Oh wow, yeah. It's kind of weird to see the lower column, then the floor, and then the fluted column above it. That's a strange look too.
It is odd. Like I was kind of wondering about that too. I've never seen anything that looked like that.
Yeah, it's unique.
But you see how big that is. It's like it's a lot. It doesn't look as big until you see somebody next to it.
What is this again?
This is the North Carolina State Capitol building.
State Capitol. Okay.
Yeah. So Raleigh, North Carolina, is the capital of North Carolina.
Yeah.
So this was some kind of a monument out in front of it. Of course,
so many monuments.
Yeah, to like World War II, I think. Yeah, World War II.
Where the fountains used to be. That's my.
Yeah, and so there's a massive cathedral there. This is another like a public education building right across the street.
Yeah.
So here's funny. I was saying like so. This is George Washington. This is a statue to George Washington inside the Capitol building. Now you look at that picture.
You got to zoom it. He looks comfy.
He's chilling.
When did he dress like that exactly? Historically?
So this is the funny thing. So this statue was said to be created in 1821. So George Washington, I had to look this up because I was like, when did he die? I knew he was president and he became president of the United States in 1789, or at least that's what I've been told.
Mm-hmm.
And he died in 1799. And so this is, roughly 20 years after he died. Somebody said, let's put a statue of George Washington in North Carolina. But again, he's not from North Carolina. He's from Virginia, supposedly. And let's dress him like a Roman soldier or an emperor or whatever.
Yeah, weird.
Like, why would they do that?
To draw the correlation of greatness?
But I mean, that's the funny thing. It's like, okay, I've said this before. The Romans are the bad guys in the Bible. Mm-hmm. These guys were supposedly kind of Christians, like a lot of the founding fathers. You know what I mean? Like the
Masonic Christians, right?
Well, that's true. Well, I mean, most of these guys were Freemasons and they were deists.
Yeah.
But it is funny. I'm saying like just based on the history we're taught, like that, like we would not. Pontius Pilate was not the good guy.
Yeah. Why would they try to mix the two? I hear what you're saying. I understand what you're saying on that for sure.
It's just funny. I was even joking with the wife, and I was saying it's kind of like, okay, so George Washington dies, and then 20 years later they make a statue. They make him like this. It's kind of like that in the 80s, them making a John F. Kennedy statue and dressing him up like a Roman.
Yeah.
Would anybody say, what? Why?
We would say that, but give it a couple years. Give it 50 years. They're like, oh, look, that guy was right.
It's like, but he wore suits. He didn't wear, like sandals and skirts and togas and stuff.
I got to ask you a question. I'm seeing it being tossed around the chat here about cloning. What's your take on cloning to repopulate in the 1800s? Do you have any opinion, thoughts on that?
I think that like I said, I try to tell people on my channel a lot that I'm open to lots of things. I'm skeptical lots of things. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I do think the Cabbage Patch thing is weird. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I have any good evidence that they could clone people. I think the more simple explanation was that there was something that wiped out most of the people, and people left to their devices, populate exponentially. Like, so that if they moved people around, people have kids, the kids have kids, the population grows rapidly. What is funny about like the what we're taught about the world population, how it's very stagnant for very many years,
Hmm.
and then it obviously blew up from 1800 to now, with from going from like 1 billion to supposedly 8, if you believe
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
I don't know. I do believe though this as a caveat, when they're talking about Dolly the sheep cloning a sheep, they've cloned more than sheep.
That
You know, by the
was in
time
the
they admit
90s.
that, by the
Wasn't
time
it
they
the 90s?
admit that they've cloned sheep,
Yeah.
they've cloned a lot more than sheep.
The Raelians, I think they're called. The Raelians. That
Raelians?
was like the 90s, right? When they said they came out and they announced they'd cloned a sheep, Dolly the sheep. Pretty sure.
Yeah. So at that point, I know that they've done more than that, and I know that
Yeah.
by the time they admit stuff, they've been working on it for a long time. Could they clone humans? I mean, I do wonder if like that's a level that God would not quite let them do.
You don't
At the
think
same
Diddy?
time, I don't know that they couldn't. I'm just
Diddy could clone humans for sure.
well, I mean, there a lot of people do think a lot of these celebrities who do kind of look alike
I
are
know.
clone.
They've got Kevin Hart's come out and said it that they were threatened to clone him. Jack Black's come out and said it. It's like I don't know.
Well,
Maybe there's some.
It's funny that sometimes people say, "Well, these people look alike, so they're clone."
Mm.
But at the same time, what's really interesting is that all these people are kind of related.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah, genetics, right?
when you actually look into like that, all the presidents in the United States, except for one, were like related to a king of England, who were all related to
Yeah.
Vlad the Impaler.
Charlemagne. I think Charlemagne gets in
Yeah,
there.
well, they're all related to also the king of England, John Laughlin,
Mm-hmm.
the guy who was like, and it was the king during the Magna Carta.
Hmm.
Well, that's weird, right? Is that you think you guys believe in coincidences like that?
Yeah, it's like only certain bloodlines get the fame here in this world.
Right. And so then you hear that even like somebody like Beyonce was supposedly related to the Queen of England, right?
Yeah,
So obviously she's related to King Charles.
yeah.
So it just happens that she's a big pop star too.
Or Obama was related to the Bushes. They're supposed
Right.
to be
That's what I'm
polar
saying. They're all,
opposite.
I mean, the fact that they're all related, it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
you either believe in, either you're a coincidence theorist
yeah,
or you just notice patterns, and like that's not
yeah.
normal. So check it out. Okay, so it's 1931. It says, on this first day, summer 1831, North Carolina State House that once stood here was accidentally destroyed in a spectacular fire. Less than 40 years before Raleigh became the state's capital, consisting of 99-foot wide streets, a few cross streets, 5 public squares. I mean, you think about how short this timeline is. Yeah, and it's saying so they built this thing, and then that's what it says. The neoclassical statue of George Washington, which arrived in December 1821. Again, this is like 20 years after he died. All this stuff happened. Yeah, so it mentioned on the morning of June 21st, 1831, the summer solstice. Interesting. The state house was being fireproofed following several disastrous fires in Raleigh. Workmen laying sheets of zinc on the roof left the project unattended, and a boiling pot of lead soldiers spilled in setting a roof ablaze over the western portico. Within 3 hours, the fire razed the building. Guys, if you see these buildings, they would not burn down. They're like solid stone and granite. Yes, I mean these are kind of more of the pictures, but it's just like there's just tons of these pictures like that. That Raleigh has tons of old world buildings. This church looked crazy old here. Yeah, there's so much here. Yeah, there's lots of old churches in here, and there's doors in this place. Again, looks like education was scratched onto the granite here, but is that what this building really was? Yeah. So that's basically my trip to Raleigh. Like I said, there's lots of stuff here.
Here I am talking with my mic off.
I was gonna say, that was my issue. I was like,
No, that's me. Um, yeah, I was just saying I'd love to come down to the States sometime and check out some of the architecture down there. People need to really appreciate what's left. There's been some big fires in the last couple of years. It almost feels like there's an attack on some of the old architecture and infrastructure.
yeah, you should probably. I know I think if I'm going for old world stuff in America, I've been talking about the wife. I want to go to Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
Philadelphia seems like a great place to go. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
if you ever wanted to go down to like Washington D.C., you have to hit me up because I'm
Mm-hmm.
about a 3 hour drive, 3.5 hour drive from D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the place where I've been to D.C. several times. But the last time I went, I remember just like looking at the other kind of buildings. Obviously, there's the real famous ones, just like that you would know, like the Capitol Building, Washington Monument, White
Yeah.
House, and stuff. But when you really take a look at, like, there's a lot of these buildings, a bunch of them.
Yeah, it's mind blowing. It was one of my favorite videos I did, DC. It's like amazing what I kept finding. And the big columns, the big battery looking buildings with all the columns,
Mm-hmm.
those ones, there seems to be a lot of those big, whatever their purposes might be, all sorts of different purposes, but massive structures.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I was going there. I was like, okay, so like you're thinking about like the idea of at least what we're taught about how America was founded. There would not have been a big federal government back then.
Mm-hmm.
So who
Mm-hmm.
was working in all these big buildings? Like, I mean,
Good
because there's
point.
big buildings, lots of office, there'd be lots of rooms in these things. Why? Like that would not have been a thought because we're taught about like that, how there's this bureaucracies and all this red tape, but these buildings were here first.
Yeah.
And so even now I was reading articles about this. And of course, this is obviously, post pandemic, they're saying how many billions of dollars the taxpayers in America pay for, office space that there's no one working in now.
Working from home.
Well, yeah. So you're talking about like obviously DC's already has a lot of office buildings, but you're talking about like the federal government that has these old buildings that are huge. I mean, take up blocks of the street, like just they have so many windows and columns, and you're like they go on forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like whoever worked in these buildings?
Yeah. Hey, good question. Did anyone ever work in them? Or
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, that's what I'm
just
saying. I really don't know.
wow.
I was just trying to think like that. The way I thought things went,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't make sense that they ever built buildings like this. And again, like you think about like we're kind of taught like this idea of like this is like public schools and things like that were kind of almost a recent invention. But these education buildings, like in Raleigh, obviously those buildings are really old.
Mm-hmm.
So like what were they doing in that building? Where
Yeah.
like when most people would not have sent their kids to public schools. And
Yeah.
you think about what North Carolina would have been back in them days, how
Mhm.
rural it would have been. Like, would there been the need for this big
No. And
centralized
then the
government? Who would
skill, they
pay?
have the skill and the manpower, to build these things. Look at this. Yeah. There's
And again, the funny part is like the consistency of the styles of these places. Because
yeah.
like I know that where I was saying when the oldest kind of big city where I'm at, not even a big city, but they have the buildings. They look remarkably similar
Mm-hmm.
to those, and they have this very similar style. And it's like, so obviously there's the same kind of craftsmanship. And I was saying the one thing I'd almost just want acknowledgement of, it's at the very least to stop insulting my intelligence to a certain degree. Just acknowledge that they don't build them as good as they used to.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
when you go see those buildings, you go into them and they're very impressive. Just say we can't do it. We can't build buildings like that because of this or that. But don't tell me that things are better now because they're not.
Yeah. Stop lying to my face when I know it's not true, right? That's
Yeah,
probably
that's
a
what I'm
good.
saying. Like I said, you see how big. I mean, I guess the thing is like the one thing you really get caught up when you just see the old world buildings is like it's how big that they are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you walk inside and they got huge doors. They go the foyers and the lobby areas are huge.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense to like how they would build it. Can you imagine like when they build the public building now?
Hmm.
It's either made of all glass, and it's like it's 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 the complete opposite of those things.
Yeah, it's awful, right? I try to envision myself working on those, up on the wooden rickety scaffold, and you got this however many ton chunk of stone coming down from the wooden rickety crane or pulley, whatever we're using to put it in place.
Pulling it up.
Yeah, where's all the rope? Where all this? It's got to be hemp rope. That's got to be part of the hemp conspiracy.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
It's so far fetched. All of it. You could go on forever about it. Really, it's ridiculous. But I think we're past the 2 hour mark, and we should probably sew this one up and call it a chat. I'm glad you came back and chatted with me about the little season, but everything really. The little season comes up a lot, and a lot of people are thinking a lot more about it these days. So it's good to get a little bit of context on what that is and the idea behind it. So I appreciate you sharing that and coming on my channel here.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the whole point, is like that we can look at these buildings and we can obviously laugh at all the lies and be impressed. Is, like, you can only do so much of that. Like, because I mean, you do have to put it in some kind of context. And I do think that it only makes sense to me that there's a spiritual context for something that would be so big that would be hidden. Because I know that it's like it's very easy to say these people are evil, but why?
Hmm.
Like, why to that level? I
Hmm.
mean, you even think about, like, some people would say the obvious answer is, and I would agree with to a certain extent, is they have financial means to lie about these things. But I mean, at some point, like, if there's not a spiritual component, there's nothing, somebody else driving them. Some people would say, don't they have enough money now?
Hmm.
But
Exactly. It's
that's
well beyond that, right?
so if it's beyond that, then they've got a different kind of goal. And when you listen to them out of their own mouths, it ain't good. So I do believe that this is a good I believe this is a good starting point, because I think that if we're in a world where we're really questioning everything, I do believe that the Bible is reliable. Whether you believe that, I would say if you could look into it, you'll find it is. And I would say that there's a reason why that things keep coming back to these spiritual issues, because obviously there's truth to it.
Hmm. Hmm. Awesome. All right, that's a good place to leave it. I hope you join me again here sometime on the channel.
Absolutely.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us in the chat tonight and watching on the replay. Take care, everybody.
God bless.